so I've been working on this, talking about this program since, for quite some time with Antoine and also with Jacob, who expanded the quartet that Dr. Barnes composed to a larger chamber orchestra piece. Dr. Barnes was a longtime Worthington president. I know that some of you in this room knew him in various capacities. He was a professor at the Ohio State University of Music, where he taught for over 30 years as a professor of composition and music theory. His tenure was from 1957 to 1988. He did his studies, his master's and PhD at University of Iowa, and studied also at Juilliard. He was a teacher of many disciplines. After he retired, he taught private lessons and also through CCAP. So he made compositions in piano and voice, and his work was performed around the country, even at the Kennedy Center and Madison Square Garden. Works were commissioned by Episcopal, Cantari, the Columbus Chamber Singers, and then he did a lot of works for the City of Worthington events. So in 1982, the Historical Society had Dr. Barnes come to one of our meetings and talk about his composition for Worthington Suite and what inspired him, how he put that piece together. And luckily, they recorded it on a cassette tape, and we were able to digitize that cassette tape and listen back to hear in his own words what drove him to write the piece. One of the things he did mention at that event and also in different recordings is that the idea was his wife Dorothy. He was trying to decide what to write for this chamber series that one of his fellow artists had conceived to bring some culture to Worthington. And so he was asked to write one of the 4 pieces, and his wife said, well, why don't you write about the history of Worthington? And of note, this summer, after we were working on this, I was in Cincinnati at the Art Museum looking at displays, and she is an artist in her own right. That's a basket that's on display at the Cincinnati Art Museum that was made by Dorothy Gale Barnes. But he said, I've lived here long enough to be very proud of the community and interested in the heritage and the history of it. So he went ahead and wrote the piece. The work debuted as a quartet in 1964 at the Share Memorial Building. And then it was performed over time at various venues. He needed a piece for a faculty concert at OSU, so it was played there. He had it recorded. The recording was sent out to public radio stations across the state. 15 different stations played it. It was performed at WOSU on TV and on radio. It was performed at the Johnson House. So it really got legs. And in 1982, it was presented again and recorded. The sheet music was published so people could purchase it and put it on the record. I have students now that come in and help archive, and I give them CDs, and they don't know what CDs are, so then we have to look at CDs, cassettes, records, and all of these different mediums that we've all lived through. And then in 1980, so this was produced in 1982, and then again in 2002, the work was performed for the Founders Day service of Thanksgiving. That was the kind of kickoff to this Worthington bicentennial celebration that took place in 2003. So I think it's kind of fitting that it's kind of kicking off America 250 here with the quartet and leading into the celebration in 2026. So there's a picture of the quartet playing at the Methodist Church as part of the Founders Day service. And then it was produced on the CD. The 1982 recording is on this CD, along with music by Eric Nesta that celebrates Worthington, and that's available for people. So then we'll get into the actual piece and the history that is told through Old Worthington Suite. So Dr. Barnes credited the text to coming from this master's thesis that was written by Gladys Linneberry. She was a teacher and then a principal for Worthington Schools, elementary school, and so she put together this resource for teaching the history of Worthington, Ohio in elementary school. And he took all the text for the piece from this. And so it's interesting when there were some pieces of the narrative that that we looked at that were a little bit outdated language-wise, vocabulary-wise, but also we started examining it. For myself and my colleagues who talk about Worthington history daily, we thought some of the pieces that are, some of the topics that are in here are just really unusual. They're a little bit tangential to Worthington history or a little bit ambiguous. And so we started digging in, what was the source material for that? And we did find a lot of it came directly from Shedding Light on Worthington, which was published in 1931 by the Presbyterian Church, and then House Historical Collections that was published in 1888. And then some of those things came from the diaries of Joel Buttles. And Joel Buttles came to Worthington first in 1804 and lived here until he moved to Columbus, or Buttles Avenue. Downtown is named after Joel Buttles. But he wrote a diary in 1835 where he reflected on the early years of Worthington. So through looking back, a lot of the material was in this 40-page diary that he wrote, and then it got transcribed into other sources, and then put into Gladys Littleberry's, and then Dr. Barnes picked from that, and it's like a game of telephone. By the time we got to the fourth iteration, it just moved a little off of what that original iteration was. So we kind of kept that in mind as we went through this process. So the work is divided into 6 sections, and the first section is the land. And in that 82 recording, Barnes talked about what inspired him for each part. And he talked about this music, he tried to give an idea of the emptiness of the land. Not that there weren't plenty of trees, but there weren't a lot of people. So the music that I've written to portray this suggests space. So when you listen to it, you can see, feel that. And I'm guessing a fair amount of you are pretty familiar with Worthington's history, but we'll talk a little bit about the land he was referring to. So in 1802, James Kilbourne and Nathaniel Little came to Ohio to make a purchase of land. 40 families subscribed to the company to buy land. They never actually got here when they visited Chillicothe, but they ended up purchasing 16,000 acres, 8,000 acres with a contiguous west half of Sharon Township, the rectangle, and that is where they settled Worthington for $1.25 an acre. They got the land. I had a very astute third grader who also heard that we tried to give $2 for the library, say, that's cheaper than the books they had to buy in the library, which I was first of all impressed. That's a great connection for a third grader to make in the moment, but also, which does kind of speak to land was incredibly plentiful, but there was nothing here. So books, being able to bring them with them was very important. So the advance party came out in the spring. Kilbourne came out with some young men to start building cabins, very crude cabins. Joel Buttles describes they had dirt floors, they didn't have time for chimneys, they just had holes in the roof. But they did build a double-wide log cabin right on the village green that was able to be used for religious activities, school. They started school in February of 1804. The last group got here in December. So they really were valuing education. And so they held those events there. They also had parties, balls. Joel also mentioned in his diaries that they held a ball at least once every 10 days. So they were looking to keep that social component of their lives, even with only 100 people here that first winter. They also mentioned, so in the text that we revised, we just kind of elaborated for the most part. We elaborated on the things that were already in the description, that the forest was full of oak, ash, walnut, beech, and sugar trees, that Kilbourne described the excellent farmland for the 40 families that were ready to journey west. And he actually wrote, Kilbourne did, a letter to his wife, who hadn't come out yet, that he found the land better than I expected, and that it was going to afford a plenty of good pasture and mowing ground. So they were very pleased with their purpose. Okay. So this is the map that James Kilbourne drew drew in 1804. And you can see this is the 8,000-acre parcel. What we now consider the historic district, or town lots, are lower, bisected by what's now 161 and Main Street or High Street. And that piece goes up to about where Hambrick Park is, south to Morse Road, and then east to 71 and west, just west of the river. So the farm lots, all of the subscribers could get a house and a town lot, and then farm lots to support themselves as well. And some of those were pretty far away from the center of town. And then Buttles also described in his diary about the game that they found in Worthington when they got here. And he remarked that there were Native American hunting parties that were seen frequently wherever the turkey and the deer and small game were. And he wrote, quote, I thought this was interesting considering what Worthington's going through now. It was thought that the whites would soon kill or drive off the deer entirely, but this did not appear to be the case for several years. The whites were probably not as good of hunters as the Indians, and being so much more engaged in other things, it was found that the deer increased more in the neighborhoods of white settlements than at a distance where the Indians were more numerous. And then he also talked about how the Native American populations brought raccoon and muskrat to trade, and then eventually when those had been hunted, they started bringing cranberries from Sandusky. And so that part was omitted in favor of being able to talk about the game that was actually found here in the new text. And then Barnes goes into the section about the mill, and he talks about how he was trying through the music to convey his sense of activity that was happening here. The text that was provided, or that he wrote originally, or used originally about the mill, had a lot of inaccuracies that, just based on it getting distilled down, kind of sent it in the wrong direction. So we did change that a lot, and having talked to the composer who expanded it, Jacob, he was saying it just really did have that feeling of activity. So we talked about it, every person in Worthington, children to older people, all had to contribute, and that sense of work that had to happen for everybody to be successful here. We do have a picture, I have a picture of a mill. This one's actually in Dublin. We don't have any pictures of the original mill that was built here, but that was a priority. They had to drive before that, they had to travel by horseback 40 miles to Chillicothe to grind their wheat to flour. So this was high priority. In 1805, they had a mill built on the Olentangy River, where South Street runs into the river today. Fox Lane still has millstones on some of the residents' properties out there. And then the third movement is St. John's Churchyard, and this part has been revised pretty significantly in the fact that Barnes chose to have different headstones read throughout the piece, that names and birth and death dates that were kind of overlapping. But in talking with the chamber orchestra folks and my colleagues, there was an impression that most of the children that came here died. Like, it was such a stressful and difficult life that it was really common that kids died. And actually, when you read through Gladys Lindenberry's research, she actually mentions that despite it being difficult and sickness being very prevalent, that ague or malaria was very difficult to escape from, there were relatively few deaths amongst the population. So we did choose in this section to focus a little bit more on what the sense you get from the churchyard, which you can still visit today. So this is a picture from around 1910. If you imagine the churchyard that we're writing about, or that we're talking about in this piece, the church wasn't there until 1827. So you would have been able to see from the village green right into the cemetery for the first 20 plus years of Worthington. And then we mentioned that families rest together. This is a really nice line of the Griswold family members. And then you can also see other names that probably ring a bell, at least from street names in Worthington, through the cemetery. These also look amazing because the cemetery is being restored, and we have cemetery experts, Ted and Nancy here, who, if you don't know anything about the restoration project that's going on right now, you should find out later, because they're doing amazing work for the headstones and also documenting the history. Yes. It's absolutely fabulous. And then also references Kilbourne's vault that's here under the tree, and that has all the Kilbourne family inscribed on the top of the tablet. So some of those are things that you'll hear in the expanded version. And then also references Abner Pinney, who was the first burial. He did pass away in February of 1804, just a few months after he got here. So that's how the cemetery got established. His original headstone is no longer there and has a plaque. The first Christmas section, we didn't really adjust anything from the original text and that into the new version. When the settlers got here, they did have a big event on December 26th because Christmas was the Sabbath, and they read toasts. They toasted political leaders, the state of Ohio. They toasted Worthington, for whom our town is named. They also toasted the fair dames of Worthington, telling them basically, stick with it, don't go back to Connecticut yet, it's going to get better. That's the short of it. And then we moved into the social life section, which also most of I think the entire text stays the same between both versions, but they talk about that what people could do for in their pastimes. Women would quilt and sew, men would attend the lodge, the Masonic lodge meetings, children would go to singing school, things of that nature. And then the last section is the Griswold Inn, and that section focuses on the fact that this Griswold Inn was a centerpiece of Worthington's early history. The Griswolds opened a tavern. They applied for a tavern license in 1803 when they got here, and then by 1811 had built this big residence where Huntington Bank is located today. The building stood there from 1811 until 1964 when it was razed, and 5 generations of Griswolds lived there. So we've got Ezra, the patriarch, his son George, and his grandson Worthington Franklin Griswold, who all lived in the house. We just got this drawing. It's the first time we've seen any kind of sketch of Ezra. Received that this year. We were really excited about that. And then Worthington Franklin had 14 children. So he was the person who converted the ballroom that was on the second floor into bedrooms because he needed a lot of space for his children. Various of these folks lived in the inn with their children, the 5th generation, over time. And then Ruth, who's on the far right, was the last person to live in the inn before it was razed in 1964. In the text, it does talk about the spinning wheel that sat by the fireplace. That spinning wheel came on the wagon with Ruth Griswold in 1803. It's now in the Orange Johnson house in the kitchen. And it also, the original text mentioned that there was a gun with a bayonet by the fireplace. And this picture also just came to us after we started this process. And you can see a gun with a bayonet in front of what is like a tableau of the fireplace. This is in an attic. It says on the back that it's in the garret. So not a functioning fireplace, but it does create that early tableau of what life might have looked like in a log cabin in 1803. So that is the speed version of early Worthington history through the lens of the old Worthington suite. And I think we're probably good to turn over to the panel, yes?
Thank you again, Kate, for that wonderful lesson on our history here in Worthington. I just would say this, I didn't learn this piece on my own. One of our board members, Ellen Stukenberg here, brought this piece to my attention. And I don't know if it was stated that the original work is for flute, clarinet, narrator with singing as a part of it, and piano. And so, Ellen was like, well, I want to bring this to your attention. I listened to the work, I loved it, and I thought this is just a great way to honor our community, not just the history, but also to talk about the wonderful people that we've had live in our community and have contributed to the arts, and that's Marshall H. Barnes, who taught at Ohio State. So Ellen, I want to thank you for bringing that to my attention, and I'm so glad that we're here today, 2 to 3 years later. So thank you so much. Let's give Ellen. Briefly, I just want to bring your attention to a person that is joining us today. Ben Shirley, if you could stand, please. I just want to introduce the audience to you before I introduce our next person. Ben Shirley is our composer and resident for the next 2 seasons. So if you came to our American Inspiration concert back in September, you got to hear one of his works. You'll have that chance again in March of this next year, as well as our May concert. So Ben, thank you for all the work we do in our community and throughout Central Ohio, and for being with us this season. All right, we're going to move into the discussion part of our program today, and I am so thrilled that we have one of the most talented individuals that I worked with in my life spearheading this. I think of Jennifer Hambrick as a Renaissance woman. Not only is she an award-winning poet, but she has a background in music. She has a doctorate in musicology. She works for WSU as their midday host, and it's so great to have such a knowledgeable person who is a big part of our community spearheading these conversations. So I'd like to invite Jennifer to come on up, and our guest of all time. Thank you so much.
Kate LaLonde's presentation really, I think, gives us a nice bit of context for appreciating Worthington composer Marshall Barnes' old Worthington suite. The orchestra will perform Jacob Reed's, one of our panelists' original orchestration, I should say, of the suite on November 9th. Some of us will perform Marshall Barnes' original version of the suite in just a few minutes here today. The Worthington Chamber Orchestra is exploring the theme of frontiers of sound for this particular kind of event, today's event, the November 9th concert. And that's, the theme of the concert, and this concert is the first concert from the orchestra's Masterworks series, which has the overall theme of American Crossroads. This entire 2025-26 season of the Worthington Chamber Orchestra is part of Worthington's American 250 celebration, which has been said, and that invites us all to take a moment and mark an incredibly important milestone in our nation's history and also our community's history as well. The Worthington Chamber Orchestra's contribution to the American 250 celebration could have been created as a blindly patriotic event. But even Norman Rockwell, who is seen as a sort of quintessentially American patriotic painter, shows his concern for Americans in troubled times in a troubled world in any number of his covers for the Saturday Evening Post. So you, Antoine Clark, this is a question for you. You have not crafted the Worthington Chamber Orchestra's American 250 celebration as a sort of naive patriotism. We're here really to have a conversation about where the country and the Worthington community have been, where they are now, what possibilities for both, the future might hold. So to that end, could you kind of say a few words about your own concept of each of these themes? The season theme, American Crossroads, also the concert theme, Frontiers of Sound, which we are celebrating today, and of course, which we will celebrate next Sunday, November 9th, and kind of what they mean to you at this particular time in the history of our community and of our country.
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, I'll give you a little backstory really quick about how we got to America 250 and this program. Again, it's such a pleasure to work with so many talented people in our community and the way we can bounce ideas off each other. So Kate, who I teach her son saxophone, and Frank, who is on the board of the Worthington Historical Society, had mentioned to me, oh, we're going to have America 250. Maybe you can program some American works. And that's easy for us at the Worthington Chamber Orchestra because we're often premiering new works by local composers or regional composers. So that was easy, but I felt like, is there a way for us to go bigger with this theme? And so American Crossroads was born. I have to be careful how I state this because we're a nonprofit and we're not in the business of political talk, right? And I really want to stress that this vision of this program is about Americans, we, all of us, and I wanted to celebrate those themes about America that really align with our mission. And so, I was thinking about a title, and Jennifer, actually, you suggested the term Crossroads, because when we think of America, there's an intersection of cultures, ideas, voices. It's not just one thing that's helped this country become to where it is. So basically, that's how we got American Crossroads in terms of the theme. And then in terms of the three programs, obviously we spoke of my work with Ellen on this work, and I thought, okay, that's a no-brainer. We need to get Worthington's history as a microcosm of really how America developed in small communities. And then I thought about one of the iconic composers, Copeland, in terms of his Billy the Kid Suite. And so therefore this idea of frontiers, expansion. But I wanted to also be careful about how I portrayed that, because people just didn't plot here, and there was land. Oh, I think I lost a little battery on that. And people just didn't plot here. There were other people here. That's okay. There are other people here, Native Americans, and I really wanted to make sure that in this idea of talking about frontier, the idea of expansion, that we included other voices. And so therefore we have a Native American composer from the Chickasaw Nation, Jared Nippachacha Tate. His work, Choki, is going to be on the program. I also wanted to talk about the idea of the future in terms of frontiers of sound. And so there's a play on the idea that we're not just playing music from yesteryear, but we want to look forward and hear voices of today and how they think about their place in history. And so therefore I'm glad that Aaron Quinn, one of our composers for this concert, was able to contribute to a new work for violin and orchestra. We'll get more into that later and let them talk about their experience. And therefore that's how we have Frontiers of Sound, this idea of place, but also of time and experimentation in terms of finding a new world, but also finding new ways to express ourselves. The second concert is called Forever Dreaming. Obviously, we always hear about the American dream. There's so many things that we learn as a kid about our country, these certain phrases that stick out. And the American dream is something that we talk about all the time. We want a house, we want a picket fence, we want 2.3 kids and 2 dogs or cats or whatever. Whatever your American dream is. But that is also connected to the idea of equality, that we all want to have a place in this country. We all want to be healthy and live well. And that was articulated through Reverend Martin Luther King. And so that program will really articulate his vision through a work called, what is it? Sorry, I gotta get the name of all the pieces. It's a wonderful work by a Black composer that really expresses Martin Luther King's voice in terms of the way he spoke. And on that program, we also have a work that's called Dreamscape for oboe, kind of more just abstract. It's a really great work. And then the last piece on that program by Florence Price is really about personal aspirations. Florence Price was the first black female to have a symphony performed by a major orchestra. And she famously said, I don't want to be looked at for my skin color or for my gender. I want to be looked at for my music. You know, and her dream was to just be her music to be heard. So I thought it was a compelling story to tell. And then finally we have Upon These Shores, which really articulates the fact that all of us come from someplace. And so we really articulate this through the fact that all the composers on that program, most of them are immigrants, or their stories about immigrant composers who came here to get started. Sorry, that was a kind of long-winded answer about the season, but a lot of thought went into that. And you know, sometimes things just line up right, and I felt like we had a really good one this time.
Thank you. A lot packed in there, and actually also a lot we can look forward to as the season progresses. So you mentioned Aaron Quinn. Aaron Quinn is one of our composers here on the panel today. And on the program for the Worthington Chamber Orchestra's November 9th concert is Your Word. Here is the picture of a wounded bird. I'm sorry for your future loss. And the piece is a work of violin and orchestra. We also have the Worthington Chamber Orchestra's concert master, Deb Copper, who is also going to be performing his violin soloist on Aaron Quinn's work. The piece explores, and sort of painting very broad and general brushes here, the piece explores individualism and identity in a world that often doesn't celebrate individualism and identity, individual identities, but instead often uses individualism as kind of a distancing factor and as a mode of overt or covert repression even. Aaron Quinn, could you talk about what inspired this piece for you and how you see it kind of complementing the theme of the concert program, Frontiers of Sound, the theme of the orchestra season, American Crossroads, particularly as Antoine Parker articulated. Like pass the money as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for hanging out. Really great question. So when Devin asked me, like, hey, can you write a piece? And I said, yes, after some convincing. I just started thinking about it most of the day, and Dr. Antoine Clark was like, hey, so we're going to be talking about America, and all this, and thinking about like how this, just about this country, about culture, about everything. And it was really difficult because, we had discussions about like, it's not all great, it's not all bad, there's a lot to it. And so I was thinking mostly about the American dream, like how we're taught this at a young age, and it's not there anymore, in my opinion. It was really never there for the last few generations, but it's still this weight that we bear, and that we try to really get to this goal, but that goal is no longer there. Hence the kind of the metaphor of the bird, like this bird that is like, it's kind of freedom, flight, but it's kind of damaged because it just was happening. And hey, I'm sorry, it's gonna be rough, but that's it. This picture, that's all. So I was thinking about that in addition to this idea that, I'm saying like 2.3 kids, but fence, American dream is this kind of image of like a normal average, like that we're all trying to get to be like all treated equally. And I was thinking about like the idea of that and what makes that an individual and what makes that like why does the fence have to be there? Why is that the end goal? And my kids, obviously, and stuff like that. But so I was thinking about the concept of the American dream, how it's not there, and how individualism is actually now the American dream. But as we know, having cool hair or having piercings or being really into Formula One racing or whatever your thing is, can be seen as like a negative and not really thought is the coolest thing about this country and us. So it's kind of like that, the idea of the soloist interacting with the orchestra, being for, against, Just like kind of easy stuff. Yeah.
Okay, and actually, well, pass the mic if you would to Devin Kaufman, because my next question is for you, Devin. And I want to come back eventually to this idea of dreams. Do we dream? Do we not dream? You know, kind of at this juncture, because I hear this theme sort of bubbling to the surface in really interesting ways. But Devin, you know, again, this piece was written for you. You'll be performing it. This piece is, from what you were saying, Aaron, you know, a piece about individualism being celebrated, being not celebrated by the group, if I can put it that way. From your perspective as a player, Devin, you know, kind of how do you see some of the musical ideas that Eric Wood just told us about sort of working out as you're sort of, since you're sort of in the piece, you've actually been inside the piece in a very intimate way.
Absolutely. It's such a great question, and Aaron was speaking about the process of what is the role of the soloist in this piece. And when I first came across it, really what I'm doing is I'm doing as much digesting as I can. So I'm listening for motives, I'm listening for you know, technical elements, and I'm doing my technical practice, and I'm workshopping, and I'm putting into sections, and I'm creating practice plan, all those things. It's just much more in my head. And then as I have really gone through the process of what I like to call embodiment, which is where the piece becomes a part of me, and I'm hearing it in my sleep, I'm feeling it in my fingers as I'm sitting here listening, and it really feels like it is part of me, connected to me. But there's this very interesting phenomena that occurs when you play a piece that's never been performed before, which is that I don't know how it sounds. I have an idea, but I don't know. And so I'm working as this individual musician, this individual soloist, this human being navigating this new landscape, which is an incredibly human experience. It's an incredibly personal experience. And I'm about to, this week, walk into a space that is brand new, where I truly, in real time, will be fighting with the orchestra and listening to the orchestra and finding my voice in that orchestra. And also, what's the best part about this whole process is working with a dear friend and brilliant composer like Aaron, who has written that process. So I wouldn't use the word perfectly, because I don't, that's never a goal, but it's brilliant. And so I'm excited for this journey that has been sort of laid out for me, because as I am, this is my job, and I have this unique opportunity to present this music in this way for everyone. I'm going on this journey in real time. So this is my art, this is my creative opportunity, these are my relationships, this is my music. And so I'm living this at the same time as everyone else, which is like a little overwhelming, I guess, to think about it. I've never put that into words, but I think that's what you'll be listening to me doing. You'll be listening to me listening and adjusting and fighting and finding harmony or tension or distress or love or hope. And so the whole experience is incredibly unique, and it's such a beautiful opportunity. I'm so grateful to Antoine for bringing this to me. I'm so grateful for Aaron to write this piece for me, and I'm grateful to be able to speak about it.
Thank you. And did you have a comment to add on?
Well, maybe if I can talk a little bit about more of the soundscape, because I do think this is the opportunity that we can do that. We don't really get to talk in depth in the concert. So, you know, I would say this for all of you, I hope you'll be in attendance. I think one thing that's great about Aaron's music is the vocabulary he uses, and the tonal language he uses is quite different than anything you're going to hear on that concert, like Copeland. which is very consonant. You got these large intervals, fifths, and fourths. And you're going to hear tension and the use of notes in an unconventional way. For example, if Aaron will allow, he uses Devon's name as a row for the melody. So Devon Comfort. Well, you may think, well, there's no V or P in the musical language. It only goes A through G. Well, he assigns certain pitches to represent those letters. And as I was listening to the work for the first time, which is through MIDI, it's just a electronic facsimile of the sounds on the paper. I could hear right away that there was something. There were certain notes and ideas that kept coming back. And the more I delved into the piece, I saw like the genius and the brilliance of what he had written. And I wrote Aaron, I said, okay, obviously I studied post-modernism, tonal language in my degree. Tell me about this. And he was like, well, I have D, G sharp, whatever, And as I went through the work, I'm like, this is just great. And the work starts off with Devon alone, and she's solitary, and you start to see these pitches be outlined. And then she kind of fights with the percussion. And then she goes into the orchestra. And it's just like really well done. But I just want to let you know, open yourselves up to this language, to this new frontier in a way, because on the first hearing you may feel like, oh, what is he saying? But if you can see the tension and feel the tension and feel the release that comes up, there's one glorious moment later in the piece that it just resolves everything. It gives hope. And so thank you, Aaron. I kind of gone on and on about that, but I just really wanted to set the stage for it. Just be open to these ideas, and that, we don't need a phrase to be so consonant, or, there's many ways to express these things, and Aaron's done a wonderful job with that.
Thank you for bringing that in. And actually, my next couple of questions are for Jacob Grabbe and also Kate LaLonde. I'm going to pass the microphone back to one or the other. You get to decide who gets it first. But Jacob, as Kate mentioned in her presentation, you were asked to orchestrate Marshall Barnes' whole Worthington suite, and your work on the piece actually ended up involving more than creating just the orchestration. Talk to people, kind of about your work with and on this suite. The two versions of the piece, your collaboration with Kate, how you changed the original version musically, but also, as you mentioned, Kate, how you changed the text, and you've already introduced us to some of that.
Listen to Jacob.
Hi, thank you all for being here. I think anytime you're orchestrating someone else's work, the first task is study and learn and think through all that kind of stuff. And that was really fun to do because it's such a wonderful piece. There's interesting ideas and used harmony in this brilliant way. And then the next thing was maybe a little bit more of extending that. I'm also a theorist, so it was fairly easy to just go through and figure out what he was doing and imagine, okay, if you had more colors that the orchestra provides, if you had more power that the orchestra provides, if you had more just options, let me guess what he would have done, which is a fun game to play. I didn't know him, I didn't work with him, but I feel like I know a little bit about his music. I haven't listened to it so much. And then there was sort of this sort of additional layer of, well, how are we modifying the piece to work, especially if we're modifying text, and that's the difference in music. And that's sort of where I ended up inserting a little bit of my own work to help it sort of fit new text and new ideas based on that text. So as Kate so brilliantly explained, the first movement is the land, and sort of expand that a little bit just to give us room for some more text and open up that idea that he gives us with the sort of vast land that's not populated, and sort of just explore that a little bit more. In the mill, which you talked about, it was all about labor and work, and as you'll hear today, I think he went with the sort of the Protestant work ethic, and references sort of like a Bach fugue almost, and I am a lover of Bach and all things Bach, so I let that play out, but also sort of added a little taste of another counter subject, just to make it even more complex and more labor and things like that. Left the dance is pretty much alone, actually, and the Christmas suite, I just expanded it and gave it more colors. And then because of the big change with the Griswold Inn at the end, I actually pulled a lot more of his music from the first movement and just sort of gave it a sort of bookend by putting that on the end. And that's where I thought that I might add a little bit more of a couple of my ideas to sort of pull us from the past to the present. I've been around Worthington for many decades, and the Griswold name, of course, is prominent, so that just felt like a great opportunity to hopefully provide some music that gives us a sense of coming through time. Those are most of the times that I added new stuff.
And there is a part, though, that you'll hear in this afternoon's performance that you removed from the original. And Kate, if this is sort of your thunder, I don't,
Maybe.
Okay.
It's an interesting piece of the Worthington history or not.
Sure. So the end of the Griswold, in which I kind of skipped to the presentation partly for time, so we can skip through all of this great stuff, is that it moved into a Johnny Appleseed ballad. And that was concerning for us at the Historical Society because we have kind of concluded that was some really great folklore that caught people's imaginations, and the idea that Johnny Appleseed slept on the hearth at the Griswold Inn, while lovely, is very highly likely to be untrue. The Griswold family, like I said, there were 5 generations of people that lived in that house. Ruth, the final resident, loved telling stories, and people loved hearing her tell stories. So she talked about how Charles Dickens stayed there, and James Monroe stayed there, and all those people did travel through Worthington. But they're also highly documented that they, James Monroe gave a speech on the village green and then proceeded to someplace else to stay. Charles Dickens passed through between Columbus and his next destination. So I was a little bit concerned about having that included, and was kind of thrilled when we sat down and talked, and Jacob said, that piece part of music is a little problematic musically, and we removed it. And it was very easy to have that piece, that portion come out for the chamber orchestra. So sometimes, that's the stories, the more fabulous and fun they are, the more they get repeated over and over. Those are people's favorite stories. And so we worked really hard to kind of let that one disappear. And I said, if this happens, it's going to be bad. Just a roar, and you're going to say, oh, no, it's bad. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Jacob Reed, actually, I'm curious to hear you talk about why you thought that particular section was, from a musical standpoint, not a historical standpoint, a little bit problematic.
Yeah, so I love folk songs, and I love classical music treatment of folk songs, but I felt like in this movement that he was doing 2 things. He was doing the folk song thing, as we'll hear today, but then also trying to harken back a little to his first movement, the sort of more Copeland-esque Americana, the plains.
The sonorities.
Yes, exactly. And I felt like time-wise, neither got enough development or treatment. They sort of both kind of dropped in, and here's this thing, and now I'm done. And so I thought, okay, it might actually be more interesting if we didn't do one of the 2, and then we could let the other one develop more. And so we chose to go to the Americana thing and bring the first movement back, and it gave me the opportunity to sort of comment on that a little, as I already mentioned, but sort of pulling us in time.
Sure.
And that's how it worked out.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Very interesting. Absolutely.
And before we get into that, we're curious. Yes, Marshall Lawrence's family is aware of the work. We received permission from them to basically orchestrate the work and make some of these changes. So, and I think his daughter and one of his sons will be at the concert.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, this has been a really rich conversation. As I mentioned earlier, pretty early on, the theme of dreaming, to dream or not to dream, started bubbling to the surface. I mean, the third and final program on the series, is really very much about dreams and visions for the future. And I think, At the very least, I think we're all familiar with the idea of, well, tomorrow, here's my to-do list, right? But on the other hand, to your point, Eric, we're maybe at a point, at a crossroads in our country where dreaming is, what are we dreaming about? What do we want to see for our country, and what do we want to see for our community? And I guess I'd like to kind of offer up those two questions, not just for our panelists maybe to sort of chew on, if you wish, not to put anyone on the spot, certainly, but also for you in the audience. What do you see for Worthington next? What do you see for America next? And to your point about this not being a political conversation, which is a very important point, this is just a respectful and forthright conversation potentially about dreams. Is it okay in 2025 still to dream, still to envision, to imagine? So I open it up. Anyone, any takers? Oh, don't make me do all the talking. Yeah.
I think it's essential. We have to have that something.
Can't hear. You need to hold that very close.
Just closer to the there you go.
Thank you.
I was like being that far.
Yeah, that's okay.
But no, I think it's essential that we dream. We have. I retired 5 years ago, and I put I'm pursuing a certain thing that I did not have time to pursue properly. So unless you're moving forward in a positive way, you've given up. So to me, dreaming is critical.
Anyone else? Antoine, did you want to add something?
So the second program, Forever Dreaming, I titled it that way because one, it feels like we're continually trying to reach a place in our existence where our society is beneficial to all and we're going to take part. So it's constant work. And I think we have to dream for ourselves individually and for ourselves as a people, as a nation. So I think that they would give up fighting whatever fight that you're connected to in your personal lives or, within your community is the place that we start growing. It's a place that it's a time when our society falls apart in a way for me. So I think this whole series of concerts, I really believe in putting forth music and programs that bring people together. We all love music. We all can feel the happiness and sorrow in our music. But can us together today talk about these things and make our community better? So I think we continually need to dream.
Not touching. I just want to say that this is a really special kind of event for me. I actually grew up in Worthington. My family has been in Worthington for a long time. I live in Worthington, just down the street. I've seen Worthington go through. I've seen Worthington grow, like in every possible sense of that word. And now I have a deep honor to kind of participate in these kinds of events, these kinds of conversations about the riches of this community. And when I say riches, I mean the historical riches and the cultural riches. And I just want to say that I have great hope for the future of this community. And I also have great hope for the future of this country because I think without hope, what is left? What do we have left? But that is just by way of hope, I think, being maybe a culmination point for maybe this discussion. I would also like to add to maybe dovetail off of springboard off of your point. Yesterday, Devin Copper and I in my WSU role, I was interviewing Devin Copper for a story about some work she's doing with her ensemble chamber groups, and we had a really interesting conversation about your, about that part of your work, that aspect of your career. And you said some really interesting things about communication and having a right to speak, which we all still do have a right to speak, constitutionally guaranteed in this country. But maybe getting to the point in actual communication where we're just about to communicate, but then something gets cut off, whatever it may be. And there's, I think that this kind of connects with some of what you were saying as we struggle with, sort of things that matter to us, messages that matter to us, points that matter to us, ideals, if I can put it that way, that matter to us, and how we work in the world to kind of convey those ideals and make them come to be accepted, if you will, by other people, by the community, or communities we live and work in. There's a big piece of communication there. I mean, that's all about communication. And to your point from our conversation, which I'm characterizing yesterday, if our communications are constantly being cut off, then that does make it difficult for us, obviously to affect change or what have you. It does kind of disempower all of us. And so, again, I think another reason why forums like this are so important is that we have a chance to kind of have a range of ideas kind of put on the table, a range of things said, opinions expressed, whatever experiences expressed, and to kind of take them in and respond to them. In what you are going to hear in the performance is that there are some bits of text which you, as Kate in particular, you have pointed out, have been changed or removed. Some of those bits of text may or may not sit so well with us, today in 2025. And that's, I think, a really interesting, those moments, I think, are really interesting sort of signal moments to kind of see how we have, our mindsets have sort of changed. And I think that we even had to have those conversations about removing these parts of text, because is that the most respectful way to represent identity in the text? I think that this is sort of the moment that we're in a way celebrating with this conversation, that we had to have those conversations, and that we chose to, kind of maybe move in a direction of inclusivity. So I'm hoping, getting back to your piece, Eric, I'm hoping that your exploration of individualism and identity in your piece, and the journey that you, Jacob, and you, Kate, and you, Antoine, in particular, and the musicians today, and I have been taking with the old Worthington suite, the old version, the original version, and also in the Jacob Reed's orchestrated version, which also represents changes to the text. I think this will change. I think this will all sort of hold hands, and really kind of reflect a dream in a way that we can be more inclusive, and we can meet each other where we are and actually hear and communicate. So, getting back to our conversation from yesterday. I hope you don't mind that I brought that in.
I love it.
Probably time for like a couple of questions or what have you. I can try to bring the mic around. Questions for panelists?
Hi, thank you so much for being here today. Just for those of us who are not musicians or academics, could you give a little context on music history and how common it is to take a chamber piece and orchestrate it, or take a phrase and build it into an entire piece, or how common is that in music history?
It's a really interesting question. Jacob, do you want to take this one?
I think it happens all the time, and there's some, wonderful examples, and there's some things that maybe don't work. One thing would be the you see Claire de Lune always gets orchestrated, and I kind of like it better on the piano. Leave it alone, right? But that's okay. I can like it better on the piano, and someone else can like the orchestration better. Like, I'm fine with that. That's the question. But I think it does happen all the time, and I think it's interesting. I think it's
Thank you for mentioning the Debussy Claire de Lune. That's a great example. And on Classical 101, I actually hear all the time like chamber works or solo piano works, which I consider to be chamber, that have been sort of put through the ringer, if I could put it that way, and orchestrated. And some of the, I tend to like a really good orchestration. I really tend to. But some of them are super, super like out there, like when Weber or Schoenberg takes Bach, particularly Weber, and makes it he had this incredibly distilled musical language and incredibly, at the same time, I would say vivid, crystalline kind of orchestration, ear and imagination, and he would take like a Bach organ piece or something like that, or a Bach harpsichord piece, and just turn it into like just this crazy kaleidoscopic thing, just sort of shifting all throughout the orchestra. So an orchestration, it can turn into its own piece. You know what I mean? That's kind of maybe an extreme example. Taking an organ piece by J.S. Bach and turning it into like a 20th century sounding, piece in its own right for orchestra. But it happens a lot. To get back to what you were saying, it happens a lot, and there's a real range, of how it happens.
And just to take that subject, what's interesting is we have 5 pieces on this concert. The only work that is purely original is Aaron Quinn's. Because the first piece, Choki, involves Chickasaw Nation hymns. Okay? It borrows harmonies from Stravinsky and Prokofiev. The eyes that we're doing, he wrote for band first before orchestrating it for orchestra. The Barnes quotes old American songs. The Copeland quotes cowboy songs and Mexican American ballads. So really, it's like this is really what America is: this blending and melting pot of intersection of themes. And Aaron, maybe I'm incorrect in what I said, but I thought everything you did was purely original in terms of, yes, but yeah, that's a very good question, and made me think about that, yeah.
Antoine, you are a timekeeper, so we
Yes, I think we should start segueing soon into, maybe one more
One
question.
more question, okay. Question, another comment, another question, comment? Thoughts on dreams for the future? Final thoughts from our panelists, anything? Yes?
I'll say one thing real quick about the orchestration thing. Also, I highly suggest the Copeland piece that if we play, but it is actually not the orchestration either. It was written for like the dance company, a few of those pieces before, and like the OG is sadly not played as much because it's a really wonky instrumentation, but it's fire. I highly suggest it. I mean, this is a classic version, so everybody loves it, not that she's singing all this, a beautiful Copeland orchestration, masterful composition orchestration. Whether you like it or not, the guy is just so good. But the original is wild. Highly suggest it. Wait.
Well, I would like to thank again all of our panelists, Ben Copper, Aaron Quinn, Jacob Reed, Kate LaLonde, and of course, Antoine Clark. And thank you all for participating in this conversation.
So, the dessert is coming up, literally and figuratively, because we have food over here for you later. But please take 5 minutes, take use the restroom. We're going to reset for the Worthington suite. Okay, thank you so much. Historical moment. All right, thank you. Before we start, I want to introduce you to our performers. First, I'll start with our newest member of the Chamber Orchestra. A few weeks ago, we had a principal clarinet audition, and Cody Grabbe, who's a wonderful clarinetist, walked away with the prize. So let's give them a round of applause. Here we have Suzanne Newcomb, pianist. On flute, we have Shultz. narrator and singer today is Jennifer Hambrick. Enjoy.
laid out the village of Worthington. The land selected for the village was a dense forest. The first trees cut were used to construct a building for educational and religious purposes, and as a shelter in case Indians should attack. The Wyandots and the Mingos were the chief tribes roaming through this area. The Indians came to the village with muskrat and raccoon furs to trade with the settlers. Later, they brought cranberries from the plains of Sandusky to trade for goods. By 1803, the first grist mill of any importance to the early settlers was built by James Kilbourne on the Olentangy River. Another mill was built in 1807 by Preserver Leonard. The motive power was obtained from Rush Brook by means of a race and wooden troughs, and was carried a distance of a quarter of a mile, where it was allowed to fall on an overshot wind. In St. John's churchyard lie Worthington's early dead. Some tombstones indicate there were those who could not withstand the rigors of pioneer life. Miranda, daughter of John and Betsy Topping, died January 9th, 1827, aged 13 years and 15 days. Jedediah H. Wiley died May 9th, 1839, in the 81st year of his age. The end of the upright man is peace. Laura, born July 28th, 1832, died August 21st,
November 18th,
1832.
1830. March 20th,
Gertrude, born
1830.
September 2nd,
Mary Antoinette,
1835.
born December
Died
7th,
Granville,
1824.
August 1833.
Died January
Died
9th,
September
1852.
21st, 1835.
Children of R.W. and L.K. Coles. Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. The first school in Worthington was a log building erected in 1803, built of the first timber cut by the settlers. The first Christmas was celebrated in the schoolhouse with much feasting and toasting. Social life in the early days at Worthington was varied and plentiful. The young people attended the singing school, which was held twice a week. The older women gathered in the afternoons for their quilting parties and sewing circles, which were held at different homes in the neighborhood. Usually, the men held their lodge meetings in the evenings after the day's work was done. Practically every 2 weeks, grand ball was held in a large log school, which was attended by nearly everyone in the community. Ezra Griswold and his neighbors erected the Griswold Inn. A spinning wheel and a musket 7 feet long with a fixed bayonet, brought to Ohio in 1803 by Ezra Griswold, stood by the fireplace. Legendary stories say that Johnny Appleseed was a frequent visitor and slept always in front of the fireplace when traveling east and west with his pockets full of apple seeds. Remember Johnny Appleseed, of the apple. He served his kind by word and deed, in God's brand Greenwood chapel. Of precious seed this handful take next this Bible. In good soil so both gives forsake of him, the meek and lowly. Remember Johnny Appleseed. One can envision the day when the dusty stagecoaches rolled under the archway.